National parks. They're the wonders of the world, but they're also home to a number of large and potentially dangerous animals like grizzly bears. And if that makes you nervous, you are not alone. Ursus arctos horribilis. The Latin name for the North American grizzly bear literally translates to dreadful bear. And of the 8 or so species of bear on the planet, brown bears are widely considered the most dangerous. And American grizzlies in particular are generally more aggressive than their European cousins. And with grizzlies now expanding their range, moving into areas where they've not been seen in more than 100 years, more than a few people are concerned that these long-absent apex predators pose a threat to human safety. This equation is rendered somewhat more complicated by the fact that grizzly bears are a protected species in the lower 48 states, particularly in national parks. Which has left many people wondering, will you be penalized for protecting yourself if you have to contend with an angry grizzly bear?
I'd like to speak to my lawyer, please.
This video is the second half of a 2-part series dispelling the internet's bull as it relates to your right to self-defense in grizzly country. In part 1, I spoke to state wildlife authorities in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho about their process for investigating conflicts and defensive shootings with grizzlies. But today we're going to discuss what rights you have to defend yourself in U.S. national parks, where grizzlies and other wild animals enjoy some of their greatest protections on the continent. So where is the line between justified self-defense and serious legal vulnerability? Today we're going to find out. With the help of John Waller, supervisory wildlife biologist at Glacier National Park, we are going to sidestep the opinions online and elsewhere, and we are going to get to the facts. And I've got to say, I'm thoroughly impressed with John's thoughtful responses to my questions, the very same questions that I posed to state wildlife managers in part 1. Now, before we jump in, if you haven't done so already, then I invite you to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you're thrilled about finally having access to legitimately reliable content and want to help the facts have a fighting chance in the internet's age of misinformation, then please consider hitting join below this video or joining our team over on Patreon. And if a monthly membership isn't right for you, you can still click thanks below this video and make a one-time donation to At Home in Wild Spaces and help support content like this. Now, John wasn't available for either an in-person interview or a Zoom interview, but he did provide written responses to my questions. We're going to start with the accusation that inspired this conversation in the first place. Question number 1. Does the U.S. National Park Service consider grizzlies more important or valuable than people? John's response, quote, "The term grizzlies and people refer to entire species, and their management is much more nuanced than implied by this question. For example, grizzlies that live successfully without coming into conflict with man are quite valuable. At the same time, some people are incarcerated for bad behavior, and some grizzlies engage in bad behavior that threatens the lives of innocent people. It is the policy of our government to remove these grizzlies." So John, like his colleagues who work for state governments, wastes absolutely no time in dispelling the completely false premise that grizzlies are somehow more important or valuable than people. It's clearly not true. But that doesn't mean that grizzlies, like other wildlife, aren't important and deserve a space on the landscape. The true problem that we're trying to address here is that our discussions with one another, whether online or elsewhere, are very much addicted to false dichotomies or false choices, which retard our ability to have informed conversations and thus make informed decisions. It's the exact same issue that plagues the mostly made up guns versus bear spray debate. So make sure to watch my video on that topic. As we're going to see from John's responses to my questions, the U.S. National Park Service is clearly prioritizing the safety of people. But it is also true that a focus on human safety is not a license for human visitors to behave irresponsibly when visiting one of our national parks. So let's get right into question 2. How does the Park Service balance the welfare of the public and the welfare of potentially dangerous animals like grizzly bears? Quote, "The National Park Service does not balance the public welfare with that of grizzly bears. Public safety is always foremost. However, we know that the public can safely recreate where grizzly bears are present by educating the public about grizzly bears and their needs. The National Park Service encourages practices that contribute to safety, including bear-resistant food and garbage storage, minimum viewing distances, and making noise and carrying bear spray when hiking. We also allow grizzly bears the time and space to adapt to the constant presence of people. This happens through temporary closures that protect areas needed by bears to meet seasonal food and habitat requirements. We also teach bears boundaries by excluding them from developed areas such as lodges and campgrounds. The result of all of this good management is that your chances of being injured by a grizzly in Glacier are very close to zero. The grizzly-caused human injury rate of the last decade was 0.03 injuries per 100,000 visitors, or 1 in 3.3 million. A person is almost 5 times more likely to die in a car crash in a national park than be injured by a grizzly bear at Glacier National Park. Now, I assume that those figures, like those of Yellowstone, change somewhat when you spend more time in the backcountry, where coming face to face with a grizzly in a potentially dangerous situation is more likely. But with some education and some proper precautions, your odds of being injured by any animal are extremely low. Again, like state wildlife managers, John is wasting zero time in dispelling the false and unhelpful narrative that bears are allegedly more important or valuable than people, again confirming that human safety is the top priority for the U.S. National Park Service. But he's also cutting to the true core of this conversation. Compared to 50 years ago, we know so much more about how to share space with grizzly bears. And the U.S. National Park Service has been at the forefront of that learning curve. In all honesty, it's more than a little serendipitous that the supervisory wildlife biologist for Glacier National Park is participating in our conversation. Glacier National Park was the epicenter of a horrific pair of twin grizzly attacks in 1967. Early in the morning of August 13th, long before the sun climbed above the peaks, Michelle Coons, then age 19, was attacked and killed by a grizzly bear near Trout Lake on the west side of Glacier National Park. 9 miles away, and just a few hours earlier, Julie Helgeson, also age 19, was attacked by a separate bear near Granite Park Chalet. She would survive for a couple of hours, but ultimately die in the dining room of the historic backcountry hostel. It has been 57 years since that terrible night. And in that time, nearly everything about bear management has changed. Food, trash, and bear management have been completely restructured for the express purpose of keeping people safe while in grizzly country. As John states, bears are actively hazed away from campgrounds and developed areas, and areas within certain parks are periodically closed to provide bears access to critical seasonal resources and allow them time to acclimate to the presence of people each year. And it is working. Bear attacks in Glacier National Park and Yellowstone National Park are at historic lows. But managing bears is the easy part of keeping people safe. In truth, most people don't deal with grizzly bears, ever. And as a result, comparatively few people really understand how to read a bear's behavior and safely share space with Ursus arcturus horribilis. Park rangers, like their state counterparts, have and continue to provide some wonderful resources for the public. But thanks to the information paradox that is the internet, which has made quality resources available to practically everyone, while also burying those resources under mountains of BS. The good news is that you're watching the Cut the Crap Guide to Bear Safety, which includes qualified advice from actual experts and bear management teams, rather than the internet's clueless gossips and algorithms that can't discern between emojis or watch time and the truth. Thanks to the serious study of bears, their needs, their behaviors, and past attacks, we now know how to stay safe around grizzly bears. The extremely low incidence of attacks on humans within national parks like Glacier and Yellowstone is compelling proof that good wildlife management, as John calls it, coupled with quality public education, benefits both people and bears alike. Properly educating people begins with preventative measures like proper food and trash management, maintaining appropriate distances, making noise when visibility is limited, and having an informed discussion about deterrence. The National Park Service, like state wildlife management agencies, strongly advises carrying and knowing how to deploy bear spray. And to echo my conversations with state grizzly management teams, there's a reason for that. Forget everyone who tells you bear spray doesn't work.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
As I've said previously, it is not a magic wand and it does have its limitations, but it is an invaluable tool, and absolutely no informed outdoors man or woman will ever tell you to not carry and know how to deploy bear spray in grizzly country. Bear spray is also not the only defensive tool. Any responsible discussion of bear safety necessitates discussing the appropriate use of firearms. Now, I have personally had at least one encounter in Yellowstone National Park where park rangers, armed with shotguns and sidearms, tried to locate an injured grizzly bear that I had just encountered. So yes, park rangers can respond to potentially dangerous situations equipped to use deadly force. But what about park visitors? In 2010, the U.S. Congress passed a controversial law signed by then President Barack Obama, which allowed national park visitors to carry firearms in national parks so long as they were in compliance with all other state and federal laws. However, discharging a firearm within a national park remains strictly prohibited. So I asked John, does the Park Service's firearm policy make park visitors vulnerable should they encounter an aggressive bear? Here's his response. Yes. Most visitors to Glacier are unfamiliar with bears, bear behavior, and how to react appropriately to an approaching bear. A bear acting aggressively or defensively may cause an armed visitor to react fearfully, drawing their weapon and shooting indiscriminately towards the animal. Other visitors may be struck and injured or even killed. Accidental shootings of people during bear attacks have occurred. Furthermore, if the bear is hit, it may cause the bear to escalate its response, injuring or killing the shooter or bystanders. Wounded grizzlies are famous for their ferocity. Now, my follow-up question. What rights to self-defense do park visitors have when visiting Glacier National Park or another park with potentially dangerous animals? Quote, all visitors to Glacier have the right to defend themselves. Usually, this takes the form of people properly securing their food and garbage, hiking in groups, making noise when you can't see down the trail, or backing away from bears when encountered. Occasionally, a visitor feels the need to shoot a bear with their sidearm. In these cases, law enforcement officers will investigate the circumstances and decide if the evidence supports a claim of self-defense. If not, the shooter may be charged with a crime. In short, you have the right to carry a firearm in a U.S. national park for the purpose of self-defense. Again, so long as you are in compliance with all other state and federal laws. But you are very much responsible for what happens if you discharge your firearm. But clearly, that is not the end of this discussion. In his responses, John touches upon perhaps the most neglected aspect of the guns as bear defense discussion. No informed individual will ever deny the validity of an appropriate firearm as a defensive tool when in qualified hands. But almost no one on the internet or even in outdoor publications is having an informed discussion regarding the knowledge and level of skill needed to reliably, effectively, and responsibly deploy a firearm in a defensive engagement with a bear. There is a very real concern that undisciplined individuals may choose to fire their weapon unnecessarily or recklessly, as tragically demonstrated by the fabled gunslinger Wild Bill Hickok, who accidentally shot and killed his own deputy during a firefight. It's not just a matter of knowing how to hit a target. It is a matter of knowing when pulling that trigger is both prudent and justified. Bear attacks are often sudden and chaotic, and while it is very true that gun users are successful at deterring aggressive bears most of the time, it's also true that there are numerous examples of accidental and sometimes fatal gunshot injuries during such encounters. And as John warns, grizzlies can be particularly ferocious when wounded. Now, that is not me telling you to not carry a firearm for self-defense. That is me telling you to make sure that you are sufficiently proficient with the defensive tools that you choose to carry. With an assist from bear attack survivor Todd Orr, I've discussed the virtues and vices of the internet's suggested bear charge drills, and in most cases, they range from problematic to completely irrelevant. It's not just a matter of knowing how to shoot a gun. Shooting stationary targets at a range is a particularly poor analog when training to defend yourself against a charging bear. There are, of course, quality drills that you can run to prepare to defend yourself should you encounter in the backcountry. But having run those drills with long guns, short guns, and bear spray, and having had success with each, I can tell you myself, bear spray is far and away the easiest defensive tool to deploy during a charge or a surprise encounter. That is even if you are extremely proficient with firearms. Listen, no one can or is attempting to tell you that you must carry bear spray when in grizzly country. But anyone telling you to not carry and know how and when to deploy bear spray when in grizzly country is not doing you any favors. Nor do they know what they're talking about. Whatever deterrence you choose to carry for self-defense, they should not replace preventative measures. The closest thing that you can get to a guarantee in grizzly country is mastering the bear attack ABCs, which I have covered in this video. My advice to you is to use the resources provided by state and federal wildlife managers and to layer your understanding of bears, their behavior, and the proper defensive measures should you cross their path. And make sure to take full advantage of the resources provided here on At Home in Wild Spaces. A huge thanks to John Waller for his time and expertise, and Gina Eisnagel, Public Affairs Officer for Glacier National Park, who helped me connect with John despite all the chaos and staff shortages authored by recent efforts to defund the National Park Service and other federal agencies. To wrap up on a personal note, I am all for cutting unnecessary spending, but spending cuts are like backcountry precautions. They need to make sense. I encourage all of you to stand up for our public lands and support the good work performed by our park, forest, and land managers. The work that they do is invaluable, and as you've heard today, helps keep people safe. I want to thank you all for watching and give a special thanks to my Patreon supporters. You are the cream of the crop. Please consider joining the Wild Spaces team here on YouTube or over on Patreon, or make a one-time contribution by clicking the thanks button below this video. Until next time, this is Mike reminding you to follow the fundamentals, not the crowd, and especially not ignorant internet algorithms. Your life may one day depend on it. Make sure that when you enter our wild spaces, that you are armed with the best information available.